Well, it's 9 o'clock. Why don't we go ahead and get started here? Before I hand this off to Glenn and David, I just wanted to say a few words. My name is John Russell. I'm the Deputy Director of the Division of Administrative Services. And primarily, I just wanted to thank all of you for participating in our, in this meeting and in the fee stakeholder process in general. I know none of this would work without your input. So we do really appreciate you taking your time away from your normal jobs to help us out with this. There is a lot of stuff going on in the water world. Obviously, we're coming out of the pandemic, hopefully. We're heading into drought season and fire season, unfortunately. So those are two of the biggest things that we're working on. But the other big thing that we are working on at the board is the drinking water and being able to provide drinking water for all Californians. So with that, I guess the only other thing I want to say is at any point in this process, if you have any questions after this meeting or at any time in the stakeholder process, don't hesitate to contact either David or Glenn or myself, and we'd be happy to meet with you individually, or we could bring up your questions in a group setting or whatever. But don't hesitate to contact us if you do have any questions or concerns. With that, I'm going to hand it over to David and his team, and they'll take and do most of the heavy lifting for us here.
Hey, thank you, John. And again, good morning and welcome to the State Water Resources Control Board's Drinking Water and Environmental Laboratory Accreditation Program Fee Stakeholder meeting. So this morning, it's a combination meeting. As John mentioned, my name is David Ceccarelli, and I'm the Chief of the Fee and Revenue Branch. I will be facilitating this meeting alongside with the lead manager in the Fee and Revenue Branch, Glenn Osterhage. Complying with COVID-19 emergency safety guidelines, today's meeting is being held remotely via webcast and Zoom. The meeting handout was sent out on June 4th. This handout was sent out through the Water Board's fee regulation LIRIS list, along with instructions on how to participate through Zoom. The handout is also posted on our Water Board's fee webpage. Individuals attending via Zoom will have an opportunity to ask questions or provide comments during the open discussion part of our meeting. Please use the raise your hand feature on Zoom. If you're joining through the webcast, you can submit a comment or question by emailing the email that's on the agenda. Today we have several fee branch staff working behind the scenes to ensure that everything runs as smoothly as possible. At any time there's any technical difficulties on your end, please email us. Again, we thank you for joining us virtually today. We thank you for your patience as we move to this 100% virtual meeting space. We're doing our best to ensure that everyone can participate in an effective manner. So let's go ahead and just go over a few meeting guidelines. Remember, please use the handouts that were sent to you via email. If you don't have the handouts, don't worry. We'll be sharing those documents on the screen. And then after a meeting, you can request a copy of documents after the meeting. We'll be happy to email those to you. Again, if any technical difficulties come up, please email our staff. Please mute yourself if you're not speaking. Remember, you can submit comments and questions throughout the event by sending them to the email link that's on the agenda. And that's about it. Those are the basic guidelines I wanted to go over. Before we get into the agenda, I did want to mention that this is our second stakeholder meeting in the fee setting process. And we host these meetings based on iterations of the governor's budget. The numbers that we're going to go over today are based on the May revise budgetary expenditure numbers. So we work closely with the Department of Finance and our budget office and our fee staff. We get together and we look at the numbers, break them down, look at the cost drivers that are driving the cost. They determine what the revenue levels need to be set at to support the programs. And so this gives us the opportunity to work with the stakeholders. Again, these are the numbers from the May revise. We are going to have an additional stakeholder meeting on August 6th. So in a couple of months. At that point, we're hoping that the budget signed on and enacted by July 1st, and then that opportunity we'll be able to go over what the final numbers are going to look like. And then we're driving to a September 21st board meeting where we'll take take some fee schedules to the board for consideration and potential adoption at that board meeting. So looking at the agenda, we're going to talk about we're going to go over the drinking water portion first. There's a couple of BCPs, budget change proposals, that are in the May revised budget that we'll go over. And then we will then move to the ELAP budget cost drivers. And then we'll have an open discussion. Now, during any time though, as we go over any of these items, we'll have an opportunity. We'll ask if there's any questions. If we see anyone raising their hands on Zoom, we'll definitely take your questions at that time. And then again, we'll talk a little more about next steps. And then, again, kind of retouch on our next upcoming meetings. So with that said, what I'm going to do is I'm going to move this over to Glenn Osterhage. I'm going to toss this to him, and he'll take over the next item on drinking water.
All right, thank you, David. As a way of introduction, my name is Glenn Osterhage. I'm the branch manager for the Fee and Revenue branch in the Division of Administrative Services. First of all, I do want to state for those that are on the webcast, we do realize there may be a lag or a delay in the feed depending on your internet connection. So if you are submitting questions via email, depending on the lag, we will get to them. It may go out of a little sequence, but we will circle back if we get one after we moved on to another topic. So hang in there. If it's a 10 or 15-second delay, it's not a big deal. But at times we could have a couple of minute delay in that. So before we start going over the attachments specific to the drinking water, as David indicated, there are 2 BCPs in the May revise. The first one listed there, number A, for the Amador County, that was in the January budget, and it remains in the May one. So that's not new. That's been out there now for two iterations of the budget. The second one is the new one. The actual full package for the entire state of California is fairly large. There is a portion that is, at least that I'm aware of, is earmarked towards the safe drinking water account. And that's the portion that we're talking about here. If there's other questions later on, I'm hoping we'll have some program staff available to discuss some of the specifics of the drought package. But when we go to the cost drivers, there is a significant impact to fees based off of that. So before we move on, at a high level, is there any questions on the BCPs other than us going through what the impacts are to those augmentations? Yes, Bob, I expected you to be early and you're right on cue.
Well, geez, and thank you. My apologies. We're having a 4-year-old grandson this weekend, so I started my chores early. Anyway, the percent change in the safe drinking water account went from 10.9 to 17.8%. I'm assuming that's due entirely to the BCP for the resilience package.
Yes.
Okay, on the resilience package, maybe you want to address this later, but it includes general fund, bonds, federal funds. It's allocated across multiple years and multiple categories. I wasn't aware fees were going to be levied as part of this package, maybe program staff, but this is a stunner. Wow.
Yeah, and we'll get into some more detail after I have one of my managers just go over the information here on this first attachment.
Okay.
We can kind of explain, as far as what I know, we've been provided documentation that the safe drinking water account is funding, I believe it's 14 positions. The intent is to fill 9 of those this year, and that's what equates to that 7% increase. And again, once we go over the staff, at the very bottom table, the other 5 positions are going to be delayed until next year. But you're right, the package itself for the state of California is significant and large. A lot of different funds, are being impacted in a small segment. And again, I don't have the details, but hopefully we can have someone jump in who can provide some more. So let's table that question right now, Bob, until we get through this attachment, and then we can circle back to any specific questions we may have on that BCP. Anybody else before we go on, just any high level questions related to the BCPs before we go into the details here on the drinking water account? Not seeing anything. So I'm going to hand this over, introduce one of our new unit manager, Pooja Vats, who will go over the information on attachment 1 for this. And then when she's done presenting that, then I'll jump in and give some additional detail. So Pooja, go ahead and take over.
Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Pooja Vats. I'm the Staff Services Manager 1 in the fee unit. I work with so I'm fairly new, but today what I want to talk about is to kind of just go over a high level of the budget cost drivers that are driving the increase we're going to see in the fee increase we're going to see in drinking water. And I am going to turn to Glenn if there's anything I missed or any program staff that want to jump in. But primarily the 3 cost drivers that are driving the fee increase are the drought budget change proposal, the furloughs, and pro rata. So those are the 3 central drivers for why we're projecting, correct me if I'm wrong, Glenn, but a 22.5% increase over the next 2 years.
For the next year.
Oh, the next year, okay. Yeah. And so, you know, when thinking about a fee increase, I'm sure many of you have questions about what drives that. So those are, that's what we're looking at in drinking water. With ELAP, I will go into that as well. It's really the expenditures, the furloughs, and pro rata that are the cost drivers for ELAP. And questions related to this, I believe, David, you're going to get into this later. So maybe if there's any kind of detailed questions that come up regarding ELAP, David.
Yeah, so we'll jump into ELAP a little bit later.
A little bit later, okay.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, so as far as these drivers, as Pooja indicated, and as Bob indicated, when we met back in, I think it was March for this program, the budget change from fees last year to what's in the budget was in the 10% range, 10.9 if I recall. Now it's the 17.8. All of it's being driven by the inclusion of the new water resilience BCP. The first question that might come up is why on the budget side you're showing a percent change of 17.8, but that bottom table for the year we're projecting a fee increase of 22.5%. And the driver for that is last year the decision was made for a lot of different issues not to raise fees for the drinking water program. And we'd anticipated having a structural deficit of about 5%, which carries over to this year. So we knew last year a 5% increase was going to be carried over to allow us not to raise fees last year. So in rough numbers, you add the 5% and the 17.8, and you get to that 22% range. As I mentioned earlier with Bob's question, the safe drinking water account portion of the water resilience, I often refer to as the drought BCP. The costs are going to be, or staffing is going to be taken over a 2-year period. The intent is not to fully staff for the BCP in the first year. So we're going to roll about 7% cost in this year. And then if you look at that middle table on the bottom for fiscal year 22-23, we are anticipating nearly a 10% fee increase next year, primarily being driven by the second year of that roll-in for that BCP. Now, obviously, the question is the state has not adopted their budget yet. So if there are negotiations that change where the funding is being directed from, that could change what we present to you in August. The other thing that we're looking at for this fund is we have a target of roughly a 10% fund reserve. Right now, we're forecasting this year to end up about 5%. It's a little low, but we didn't want to try to get to a full 10% reserve in the first year, especially with the inclusion of the drought, the removal of the furloughs. So we're going to try to phase it in over 2 years to get to our targeted fund reserve. So this year, again, the very bottom line of that third table shows a target of a 5% reserve. Next year, we are looking to try to drive that up to 7.5, so right in the middle of the 5 and 10. And then in year 3 on this chart, we go back to what we consider a standard program increase of roughly 4%, and that will hopefully get us to our target of a 10% reserve. Now, those of you who participated in the calls yesterday for both water quality and water rights are aware of the fact that we're still waiting to get some accounting reports for the prior year and for current year. So we're still using projections for just over a year. So there could be some true up in our numbers. And the easiest way to explain that is if the numbers we're plugging in for revenue, if the actuals are lower than what we were projecting, actually, our fund reserve will be less. And so we have to recover that. And the flip side, that also puts pressure if expenditures that are actuals tend to be higher than what we are using in our projections, it could have a negative impact. Now, I'm always the optimist. I'm hoping that revenue will come in at or slightly above our projections, and expenditures will come in at or a little bit below our projections. But we do have the risk of the numbers kind of being inverted, and that could put more pressure on our fund reserve being lower than our target. So with that, David, I don't know if you wanted to jump in on anything. I know the other question that's going to come up is to pro rata. So I don't know if David, if you want to go ahead and add anything on that topic while we're still talking about drinking water, and then we'll open it up to questions.
No, I would say that pro rata costs in the drinking water, and I kind of mentioned this yesterday, for our overall organization, our pro rata cost, and again, for those that are unfamiliar with what pro rata is, it's basically it's basically like a fair share. Basically, what we're paying for is all the central service agencies statewide. So some of the agencies would be like state controllers, governor's office, Department of Finance, Department of Justice. I believe there's about 17 different state agencies, and so each department throughout the state gets a share of pro rata, and Department of Finance gives direction basically of how to spread that out to each of the funds. And I believe this year it's a little over 23 million is our pro rata cost, and then the year before it was around 20 million. So it's gone up about nearly $3 million. And Department of Finance, they try to kind of true it up basically on each of the funds. And with drinking water, that's happening now. It's being trued up. It's roughly around, I think on our charts, it says about 5% basically increase. So I believe finance is looking at all the different funds, and basically some of our funds have been underfunded or under allocated when it comes to pro rata. And this year they're looking at very closely and trying to tie it to again, the size of the fund, staffing levels into the fund. I'll also say that costs for other agencies, when they go up into pro rata, our costs go up basically. So that's kind of what's driving that pro rata cost. And so again, and just to be consistent, all of our fee funded funds pay a share towards pro rata.
Okay, thank you, David. And before we take some questions, the other item on the cost drivers that we tend to get a lot of questions on is the what we refer to as the removal of furlough salary savings. So last year, obviously, through the pandemic, there was negotiations for state employees for up to 2 years to go on furloughs twice a month. The net effect to the fund is roughly about 5% to each fund. It was anticipated that that would stay in place for 2 years, although there was language that depending on the state's revenue and how they're looking, it couldn't be 1 year. But when we did our analysis last year and we went to the board with a recommendation for drinking water not to raise fees, we did anticipate the furlough staying in place for the 2nd year. Obviously, the state is in a better position, and the budget is going to reflect staff going back to full-time starting in July 1. And so those costs are now being put back in. So they were always there in the budget. We just targeted fees at our lower amount and did our forecasting for 2 years at the lower amount. So with it reverting back to full staffing authority, those costs are now being put back in, and we are having to recover those costs that we weren't anticipating. We had thought that this would be added in next year, so 1 more year of deferral. That's not taking place. So the 3 primary cost drivers we talked about, furloughs at about 5% impact to fees, the drought BCP, and we'll bring in some program staff here in a moment to talk about that. That's driving another 7% increase. And then pro rata, as David indicated, those adjustments are causing another 5%, plus the fact that we knew we had a deferral and a structural deficit in the fund last year that the board decided not to raise fees on and to defer it a year. And that's adding roughly another 5%. So those are the drivers that go down to our 22.5%. So before we bring in any discussion on the drought BCP, because I know that's a topic people want to talk about, do we have any questions for Zoom participants? Or Stephanie, have we received any email questions at this point?
There are no questions at this time, Glenn.
Okay. And we'll give it a moment to see if anyone, I'm not seeing anyone raising their hands on the Zoom list. So at this point, I'm hoping Darren Polhemus, if you're available to join us, any comments you have related to the entire drought package, which, as we indicated, is quite significant for the state. And as I indicated, there is a portion that's being directed specifically towards the safe drinking water account. But I'll go ahead and hand it off to Darren, and then we can ask any questions from there. So thank you, Darren, for joining us today.
Yeah, no problem. So obviously we're a part of the drought relief package. When we were putting together our part of the BCP, what we did is we actually began with baselining our workload using our workload model. That workload model actually surprised us all. It had changed dramatically on the complexity of water systems we face. Largely, almost all the groundwater now has treatment. We used to have a lot of groundwater that didn't require treatment and oversight. That's been a huge shift in the state. That alone showed in our workload model a need for, I believe, going from memory here, over like 24 staff. When we added in the drought workload that we anticipated seeing coming, our workload model said we needed 50 new staff in DDW. That's obviously a bridge too far to do in one fell swoop, and it needs to be monitored, but that's kind of where we're at in being behind the 8 ball on more work to do than staff we have. So I think from that basis, it was decided to put our drought component of 17 staff into permanent fees and make them permanent staff. They don't even rise to the level of our current workload status, but they will be definitely focused on drought relief and drought efforts as we proceed into the drought. So we will prioritize all those staff to make sure that we're addressing the drought workload components and helping water systems through that aspect. So I think that kind of shocked us all a little bit, but I believe that's the basis behind our program being one of the very few ones that is actually going into a fee basis and a permanent staffing arrangement. I don't know if that helps, Bob.
Am I unmuted?
Yes.
Okay. It helps. It would help to receive a briefing, because in my considerable length of time in state budgets, on both sides of the fence, I have never seen an impact like this. Keeping in mind as well that the last drought response was general funded, that some of this is dedicated by is brought about by what's supposed to be one-time program funding from ARPA. This to me is a classic exercise of the water board using an appropriation to justify adding staff that may or may not be necessary. That's why we have got to see this in something we can understand. With all due respect, Darren, you know, at a time when local water districts and municipalities have, as you well know, billions in unpaid bills, and then the fees go up. This is going to require a lot of talking and perhaps a special meeting. And I'm sorry. Thank you for listening, Darren.
Yeah, I know, Bob, but I do also want to point out that our fees account for 0.02% of the revenue collected by water systems. So they have a lot of other big expenses than us, I know for a fact. And while our number looks big, when you look at it here, it is nothing compared to what I know water systems face. We're also redirecting a large portion of our staff from our traditional work to run the arrearages program so that we can do that quickly. That's another BCP that's not obviously included in this fee structure. We did not ask for any staff to do that. It'll be a complete redirection of our existing staff for that temporary program to make sure that we're assisting water systems there. So we face a huge deficit, and I will get way behind on our work, but we're trying to prioritize what we do for both making sure we do the permitting necessary to keep water systems going during the drought, and then the arrearage program to try to help them recover from their revenue losses associated from the pandemic stretch. So I appreciate your comments. But
two things to respond. One is water quality and water rights fees are also going up precipitously. Many of the water districts in rural areas, again, as you know, are quite small. They're heavily impacted. The drought's going to devastate their economies from which they may never recover. So being able to review rationally a written plan would be good, because the BCP is a kind of a global document and it doesn't really address drinking water. So it would be good, Darren, and we'd appreciate the details. Thank you again.
Yeah, no, I totally understand. Our direction was to put it into this massive BCP. We follow Department of Finance, as you know, as well as anyone's request on how to do it. You got a gripe, you know where to go talk about how that got put together. So it was one direction for us to do that, unfortunately.
I'll call Matt Almy and tell him you told me to.
Yes, tell Matt.
All right, is there anybody else on the Zoom that has any questions related not just to the BCP, but to anything we've talked about as far as cost drivers? And then Stephanie, I'll also check to see if we've received any email questions at this point.
Now, this is John, just in relation to what Bob and Darren were just talking about. I'm not sure we even know exactly what is going to be in that final BCP in terms of the details. That was one of the BCPs that they passed, a placeholder type of BCP. And they said the details will be worked out with the administration and the Senate and the Assembly later in the summer. So there's quite a bit of uncertainty. And I'd agree with Bob that, you know, it's hard to tell exactly what is going on in that BCP.
Thank you, John. We'll take a moment. Stephanie, any email questions for us to take?
No questions at this time.
All right, thank you. And not seeing any hands. So again, we've covered the drinking water, the comments other than the inclusion of the drought BCP and the May revise. The rest of the analysis is in line with what we presented back in March. So yes, that 7% increase for the drought or water resilience is a huge eye opener for everybody, but the other numbers have been consistent now. Obviously, when we get an adopted budget here next month and we prepare our documents for the next meeting in August, if there's any changes, we'll discuss those then. So if there's no other questions on the drinking water side of the house, I think we're ready to pivot down to the next attachment, which is for ELAP. we'll bring Pooja back in. She started talking about this, but we didn't have the attachment up. So we'll have her just give a few seconds comment of what's on here. It's a little more straightforward. But Pooja, we'll go ahead and have you just briefly go over this, and then Dave and I will take it over from there. Oops, we had a hand up. Sorry, Debbie Webster. Sorry, I'm going to cut you off, Pooja. Debbie Webster, your hand is up. Go ahead.
Sure. Sorry about that. I couldn't get the things to work right. My question was on some of these areas where there's state and federal funds that are coming in. You mentioned that there was a lot of personnel that was a major cost driver, and I think it goes on both sides of the house, whether it's on the clean water side or the drinking water side. But is there a way, is that something that has to be fee-borne, or is there a way to utilize some of those funds to pay for that staffing?
That's outside of my wheelhouse. I'm not sure if John, David, or Darren have anything specific related to that. I think, David, you're going to pop on there.
Well, I'll go ahead and let Darren, since I think Darren just popped on. Or
Debbie, do you mean the ARPA funds and stuff? Because that's restricted to infrastructure and certain costs. And there is the ability to put admin costs for distribution of those funds, which will go out of those funds, but not regular regulatory work.
No, I understand that. I thought, and that was 2 screens ago. I mean, two sections ago, that you said that some of those cost drivers were for special to be able to distribute some of the incoming money out to different programs. So when I whether it was for clean drinking water or other issues like that, where they're getting, we're getting federal funds to help these areas. It sounded like there was a lot of staffing that was required in order to get those funds out. And that's the question that I was wondering is there a way to roll in that staffing into some of the costs there? Because
yeah, so there are components that are going to DFA and others, and they are using the administrative allowances for their staffing on that aspect of it. The drinking water portion that's here does not include that component. So this is our opponent of the drought, and the water resiliency package was really strictly regulatory and permitting activities associated with the drought and other aspects of that. So that's why it's put into the safe drinking water fee.
Okay, so that's how, so the points that where you can put those costs into those kind of programs you do, and then this is on the other ones. Okay, thank you.
Yes, absolutely. We definitely always take advantage fully of that. And just a reminder as well, part of our program in drinking water does get federal grant funding. It's like a quarter of it does come from the PWSS grant, what is that? I'm going to forget the acronym now, Public Water System. I forget the second S, but it's the federal grant to support drinking water, as well as some allowances out of SRF, drinking water SRF also go to support the drinking water program. So we take full advantage of all the federal funds that we can first before we then turn to fees for the rest of the program.
All right, thank you, Darren. Debbie, anything else before we move on?
No, that was it. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Debbie. So again, we went back to attachment 1 because we went back to the drinking water. I'm just waiting. I don't see anybody else stepping in. So we'll go ahead and again pivot down to attachment 2 for Pooja, just to give a few extra comments. Again, this is a little simpler chart than drinking water. But go ahead, Pooja, and finish off here, and then I'll jump back in.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, so I don't have too many comments other than just kind of wanted to recap the cost drivers for ELAP. First is, expenditures going up. We have the furloughs again, and then also pro rata. And again, I think it's, Glenn, please jump in, but it's a 12.5 fee increase for ELAP, correct?
Yeah, it's not reflected here, but the expenditure side is about a 13% difference. we're currently projecting fees going up 12.5, so it's pretty close. But we're still, we'll assess that as we get to the August meeting.
Okay. But yeah, that's sort of the notes that I have for what's driving costs regarding ELAP. If there are questions, can we take a minute and ask Stephanie if there are any questions that are coming in regarding Environmental Laboratory Improvement Fund budget cost drivers at this time?
Sorry, it took me a second. There are no questions at this time.
Okay, and as we're, Debbie, before we get back to you on this one, the first question is going to come up if you compare what we call ELIF, which is the fund, or the ELAP program versus the drinking water or the Safe Drinking Water Account Fund. Furlough adjustment, they're pretty comparable to each other between these two programs. And the pro rata here is 8%, so it is a higher percentage change for this. So Deb, I'm going to go ahead and take your question. If it's not related to pro rata, then we'll have David come back in and give a few comments related to the ELAP portion of pro rata. So go ahead, Debbie.
That exactly was my question. So the pro rata here is at 8. Most of the other programs, it's at 5, 5.5, plus or minus a little bit. What makes the difference?
So I'll hand that off to David since he's been researching that issue with our budget office.
Yeah, so thank you, Debbie. And I know I think last time this kind of came up also. So I went back to the budget office and contacted the Department of Finance. And what I did was I looked at what the pro rata allocation was for the last 2 years in the Environmental Laboratory Improvement Fund. And in the last 2 years, it was around 3%. And again, where most of them are more around between 5 and 6% on our other funds. And so working with finance, finance said that allocation was kind of under allocated. It was low compared to some of the others. And so looking at a documentation that is provided on DOF's webpage and working with them is that they do try to true up the pro rata each year. And so there's a question about why is the assessment sometimes increased or decreased? And basically what I was told and our budget office was told that there was a jump this year just to basically true it up and to pretty much play a little catch up for the last couple of years. So we've been under collecting in the pro rata side of it. Again, it was around 3% the last 2 years. And this year it has jumped up to about 8%. But it basically gets us in line with what our other funds are. Basically, again, finance has said that the times that there's previous estimates were lower than the actual cost for the past year. So this year, from our understanding, it's just being trued up by the Department of Finance. And we should see more of a consistent pro rata cost moving forward. And Glenn, do you have anything else you wanted to share on that?
Not on pro rata. Before we take other questions, the other point I was going to bring up for the ELAP program, as most of you who are in the process are familiar with, program took a multi-year process to change their program regulations. It was finally adopted by the board last year. Our fees, we did a major fee structure change last summer that the board adopted. And I think everyone understands it's going to take 2, 3, 4 years to fully assess the changes of that fee structure, because it is a different way of collecting revenue, the changes with the third-party assessments. So program and our branch are committed to review that. It's just very early in the process because we're within the first year to assess what those fees, we estimated what we needed the fees to be off of a lot of assumptions on the different type of activities within the program. And as we start seeing historical trends, again, over 2 or 3 years, we'll be able to reassess and make sure we appropriately align the fees with the actual activities that are going on out there. So Right now, we're not looking to make any adjustments to the fee structure. We're just looking at having a structural shortage of revenue for the expenditures. But again, we are committed to review that in a year or two once we have a good basis of historical data with the new program regulations and also with the new fee structure. So with that, we're going to see if we have any questions as it relates to the ELAP program. And again, Stephanie will ask to see if we have any email questions.
Yes, we do. So this is from, pardon me if I'm saying your name wrong, it's Shashmita Reddy. With the new regulations effective and the new fee structure in place, the fees are already up this year significantly. Is there a possibility of deferring the increase this year to a later time so smaller labs already struggling during this pandemic can have a breather and some relief?
So before I have David jump in on any comments, so obviously when we go to the board, we have to make sure we have a solvent fund. We try to have, again, this one, we try to have about a 10 to 15% fund reserve. There are a lot of changes, as we just indicated, with the new regulations and fees, but we will brief our board members if there are options. In prior years, I know this program, and I know we've done it for like drinking water last year, we didn't raise fees. We at that time had a prudent reserve, and what we thought with the furloughs being in place for 2 years, we were able to recommend to our board not to change drinking water fees. So we'll assess the ELAP program as we do with all of our fee funds. That's the water quality and water rights. If there is an opportunity that we feel that we have revenue sufficient enough to cover expenditures, then we can make recommendations to the board, or the board can decide to defer fees. We should hopefully have a better idea of what we're looking at once we get the adopted budget and actually, crunch all the numbers, do another update of our revenue forecasts. But where possible, the board will consider it, but we do have to make sure that we have a positive balance in the fund and that we're solvent. David, anything you want to add to that?
I think Glenn touched a lot of the things I was going to say. And I know Glenn mentioned this earlier, and we talked about this yesterday with the kind of closing year and accounting reports. That also provided some information whether there is a prudent fund reserve where some of that reserve may be able to offset some cost, and that provides us an option that we take to the board to help cover the expenditures in a 1-year process. The tricky thing though with deferring costs is that they just don't go away, and it puts us into the potential of higher increases in a future year. But as Glenn mentioned, we definitely get to a briefing portion with our board members, and we not only do we lay out what the budget is and numbers and things like that, but we also we listen to the stakeholders' concerns, and these are the concerns that we address to the to the board members, and we'll be directed to put together multiple options and discuss the options of covering the program cost.
And to add on to what David had just said about deferrals, can be a little tricky for both, like we mentioned, the drinking water program. We deferred last year based off of the analysis, the information, to defer 5% to this year, not knowing obviously that furloughs were going to go away, that there was going to be a drought BCP, and also for like our water quality program, they're looking at 10 to 15% fee increases for that program because there was a decision by the board to defer some costs. So as David said, they don't go away, they just get added on to whatever other increases are going to be put onto those funds. So when possible, our board does a great job of taking those comments into consideration. They're well aware of the pressures on whether or not, in this case, water systems or labs or any of our fee paying permittees, and they will take that into consideration. So Stephanie, any other questions?
Not at this time.
Okay, anyone on the Zoom platform have any questions? Right now we're talking about the ELAP program, but we're more than willing to go back to the drinking water side if there's any questions there. And as I'm waiting for, we did get one separate email outside of the meeting talking about ELAP with fee increases since it came to the water board back in 2014. There's a lot of, I should say, with the CDPH, that was the agency that ran this program before, was basically underfunding this program. It took a number of years. Staff are pulling up a chart that we presented to our board last summer. We'll wait for them to resize this. There we go. So this is a slide again that we presented to our board last summer when we adopted the fee method changes. But for the ELAP program, we're well aware since it came to the water board that fees have gone up significantly. A lot of that was historical. It was underfunded from the prior agency. The decision was made to do those increases over a course of a number of years. So 2016, 2017, 2019. There were actually no increases for the ELAP program for 10 years prior to it coming over to the water board. So mathematically, if you look at that entire period of time, the average increase was about 6% for a fund that was underfunded to begin with. So yes, we realized in any given year, there were significant fee increases, but when it was annualized over the life of the program, without fee increases to support the program, it's more in line of our, a little bit higher than our typical 4 or 5% that we would estimate. So I just wanted to throw that out there because we did have one email come in separate prior to the meeting. David, anything you wanted to add? I know you're still highlighted up there.
No, I think you've covered it.
Okay, so if we can go back to the agenda.
Hey, Glenn, before we get to the agenda, Debbie, if you're still online, what I was going to do is I'm going to send you an email this morning, and I will attach, again, a document, a Q&A from Department of Finance that talks a little more detail on pro rata. So take a look at it. If, again, you have further questions after you look at it, please let us know. I'd be happy to discuss or help respond to some of those other additional questions.
Okay, so we're just waiting to see if we can get the agenda put back onto the screen here. But we've covered the primary talking points for both the drinking water and the ELAP programs. We went over the cost drivers. In summary, drinking water has 3 primary cost drivers: removal of furloughs, the drought BCP, and pro rata are the 3 that are driving it, plus a deferral of fee increases from last year. ELAP, the 2 primary drivers are, we're almost about to have it back up there, are the removal of furloughs and the higher than anticipated pro rata that David discussed. So those are the drivers. Other than the drought BCP, which is bringing in some additional staff for the drinking water program, the increases are related to activities outside of actual program staffing and inputs. So we can go back just to the main agenda, please. Thank you. So any questions here before we move on? We didn't have a whole lot to go over other than the drought BCP, which was the new item for both of these funds. As I previously indicated, the information provided is consistent with what we did in March. Hopefully, you know, we'll get the adopted budget here in the next month, and we'll see what the impacts are with what gets adopted. So as I'm not seeing any questions, I'll pass it over to David if you have any final comments, and then we'll open up the table for any more questions.
Just again, you know, our next steps, we have meetings on August 6th, would be our next stakeholder meeting based on the July enacted budget. The only thing I would say there, you know, we're always trying to maybe anticipate if there are going to be any additional cost. I know there's some unions out there that are negotiating some employee compensations. That's kind of all out of our control. And I can't say they're going to be in the budget or if they're going to come in later. But there are, again, some discussions that are taking place there. And, we're hoping that there's no kind of late surprises and things like that. But again, it gives us an opportunity to meet in August to discuss what we'll see in the budget. And then again, finally, we'll be taking items to the board on September 21st. Again, there'll be an opportunity for a public comment period prior to the meeting. Instructions and the agendas will be going out prior to that board meeting. So those are some of the basic next steps. And then as John Russell had mentioned at the start of the meeting, during this process, if anyone has any questions, concerns, wants to meet with our staff and or program staff, we'd be happy to coordinate and have further discussions.
Okay, so we'll give it a moment to see if anyone on the Zoom platform have any questions or comments, and then we'll also ask Stephanie one more time if we received any email questions.
There are no questions at this time.
Okay. So not seeing anything. Go ahead, David, and you can finish this off here.
So again, I wanted to thank everyone for participating. For those stakeholders online and through the Zoom, we appreciate it. We appreciate all your feedback. We couldn't run this process without you guys. Want to appreciate Darren and program staff that's involved, and then Glenn and Pooja and the staff behind the scenes that are running all the IT stuff. I appreciate you guys. So again, we'll be talking in another couple months. So with that said, we'll sign off, and thanks everyone.
Thank you.